Oh, hello there. I see you clicked this link to learn more about the War of 1812. Well, let me teach you more about this war. Alright, so before the war happened, a lead up to the war started happening when England and France began to fight over stopping the US from trading with the other. And so the British passed the rule of 1756, which basically stated that trade that wasn't allowed during peacetime wasn't allowed during wartime. And so the Royal Navy enforced this from 1793 to 1794. And so on November 19th, 1794, the Jay Treaty stated that Americans couldn't make a trade with the British and the East Indies. The Britain evacuates its forts in the northwestern territories, and the Mississippi River opens up to both countries. However, many Americans didn't like it. After Thomas Jefferson became the president, relations with Britain started dying, and the rule of 1756 became active in 1805. After the British won the Battle of Trafalgar and efforts to blockade the French port, Napoleon, the leader of France at that time, decided to cut off British and American trade. And so, on November 17th, 1806, Napoleon decided to create the Berlin Decree, which is also known as Napoleon's Continental System, which basically stated that anyone who visited British ports would instantly be marked as an enemy. And so Britain, in response to that, used the Orders in Council, and it stated that ships had to get a license to trade with France. And so France responded with the Milan Decree, which stated that all neutral ships had to be searched by Britain. This was important because any American ships that went into the British ports faced capture by the French, and any American ships that went to French ports faced capture by the Royal Navy. And the American Navy couldn't do anything about this because they only had 16 ships in service, while the British Navy had around 500 ships by 1812. The Royal Navy started using impressment to refill its ships and captured American merchant ships and claimed they had deserters. In 1807, a British ship fired on an American ship and captured 4 men, 3 of whom were American. They did apologize for this, however, but this pushed Jefferson to make the Embargo Act of 1807. However, the Embargo Act hurt more Americans and caused Congress to replace it with the Non-Intercourse Act. However, this act proved to be ineffective and was replaced with Macon's Bill on May 1st, 1810. And the Macon's Bill resumed trade with every country, but if Britain or France re-engaged with commercial restrictions, they would drop trade with them. And so France dropped their restrictions, but the British didn't. Meanwhile, on the U.S. Northwestern Front, the Schwanwee brothers, Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa, aka the Prophets, started to attract followers and attempted to create an Indian confederation to fight back against the American expansion. American settlers blamed the British for hard tensions with the Indians, and while this was going on, the Americans tried to launch a campaign in Canada in 1812 to try and capture it so they can use it as a bargaining tool to gain stuff. Most Americans thought this would be easy because they had more troops than Canada and they thought they would be welcome as liberators, but they failed. And on November 1811, President James Madison decided to call in a U.S. Congress session into order. They talked about possible war with Britain, and people who supported this possible war were called war hawks. And they talked, and President Madison decided to declare war on June 1st, 1812. New Englanders didn't support the war, but Westerners and Southerners endorsed the war. The American Navy won the early battles in the Atlantic and Lake Erie. This was mainly due to the ongoing war between Britain and France, and when the British defeated Napoleon in 1814, it turned its attention to America. After multiple defeats by the British, the Americans were demoralized. The British captured Washington, D.C. on August 24, 1814, which shocked the Americans. And next, the British set their eyes on Baltimore, Virginia, since it had an important port they needed to capture. On September 14, 1814, the British bombarded Fort McHenry. It was shot for 25 straight hours, and Francis Scott Key witnessed the event on a ship miles away and saw the American flag still standing and realized they won. And he decided to write the song we now use as the national anthem. Now, before the British assault on Fort McHenry, Mary Pickersgill was contacted to make 2 flags for Fort McHenry, and one became the Star-Spangled Banner. And this flag helped inspire the Francis Scott Key to write the song used for the national anthem. By around the time of the Fort McHenry attack, there had already been peace talks in Ghent, or more known as Belgium in today's world. They negotiated that the US stop demanding to end impressment, Britain promised to leave Canada's borders unchanged and abandon efforts to make an Indian state in the northwest. And so, after that, the Treaty of Ghent was signed on December 24th, 1814. However, on January 8, 1815, British forces attacked New Orleans. They had been unaware of the Treaty of Ghent signed weeks before, since it takes news a lot longer to travel, and they fought at the Battle of New Orleans, where the British met General Andrew Jackson and his forces, and the British lost Andrew Jackson, which boosted the Americans' morale by the end of the war. After the war, it was seen by Canadians and Indians as even more of an inspiration to be self-governed, and the war impacted America too, and the time after it was called the Era of Good Feelings. The Americans celebrated that they went head-to-head with the greatest military in the world at that time and drew with them and won against them, remember, with the Revolutionary War. And the war also marked the end of the Federalist Party, since they were accused of being unpatriotic since they never supported the war in the first place. So I think a good conclusion to the War of 1812 is that the British are frauds and America's just better, yeah.